The wind comes first. Not the cold, the wind. It moves across the Eurasian steppe at 60 kilometers per hour, unbroken by forest, unslowed by hill, finding nothing between it and you but open grass and frozen sky. And it doesn't stop. It doesn't shift. It just keeps coming, hour after hour, stripping heat from every surface it touches. The ground, the animals, you. Then the cold arrives behind it, settling in like something that intends to stay. Minus 40 degrees Celsius on an average winter night. Minus 50 when the sky clears and the stars burn cold and sharp overhead. At these temperatures, exposed skin freezes in under 5 minutes. Your breath crystallizes before it leaves your mouth. Tiny suspended ice particles that locals once called the whisper of the stars. Metal doesn't bend in this cold. It shatters. And when the wind runs at 60 kilometers per hour across minus 40 air, what your skin actually feels is closer to minus 70. Frostbite doesn't take minutes at that point. It takes 2. This is the Mongolian steppe in winter. 5 months of it, sometimes 6, from October through April, across thousands of kilometers of treeless grassland, with nothing to hide behind and nowhere warm to go. Most people, dropped into that landscape unprepared, would not survive the first night. But here is the thing that changes everything. People didn't just survive here. Families raised children here. Herds were kept alive here. And on the coldest nights, when wind tore across open ground at killing speed, there were families sleeping warm inside a circle of felt and wood, comfortable enough to shed their heaviest layers. From the outside, it looked like a tent. Something temporary, something fragile. It wasn't. Before we talk about the structure, you need to understand what it was built to fight. To understand what the Mongols built, you first have to understand what they had to work with, and what they didn't. The steppe is grassland, thousands of kilometers of it, stretching in every direction, and almost entirely treeless. Trees existed near rivers, but even then, sparsely, too sparse to harvest freely, too valuable to burn. For the people living here, wood wasn't a building material. It was a luxury. You saved it. You used it carefully. You did not build walls out of it, and you did not feed it into a fire all winter long just to stay warm. What they had instead was animals. Sheep, horses, yaks, and camels, and everything those animals produced. Wool that could be processed into felt, dung that could be dried and burned, hides for binding and covering, and the animals themselves, whose body heat, whose movement, whose very presence added warmth to any enclosed space nearby. This was the inventory. Now consider the problem. At the same time, European civilizations were cutting timber, quarrying stone, and putting entire villages to work building thick-walled structures that still let cold seep through by January. The Mongols needed a shelter that could match that thermal performance, load onto the backs of 3 camels, and be rebuilt by a single family in under 3 hours. And it had to work 4 times a year, because Mongol families didn't stay in one place. They followed the pasture, spring camp, summer camp, autumn camp, winter camp, each in a different location, sometimes hundreds of kilometers apart. Most civilizations fought nature. The Mongols negotiated with it. They looked at what the steppe offered, and built a solution from exactly that, nothing more. But the physics they had to defeat was brutal. Radiant cold rising from frozen ground, convective heat loss from wind that never stopped moving, moisture from breathing and cooking that would turn to ice inside any insulation that couldn't handle it, and fuel so scarce that every unit of heat generated had to be captured, held, and recycled with absolute precision. There was no margin for a flawed design. The answer wasn't a better tent. It was a machine, and it had 5 moving parts. The gear had 5 components that made it work. Not 5 features, 5 interdependent systems, each solving a specific physics problem, each making the others more effective. Remove any one of them, and the whole solution collapses. Start with the shape. The gear is a perfect circle, and that is not an aesthetic choice. It is a thermal and structural decision. A circle has the lowest surface area relative to its interior volume of any shape you can build. Less surface area means less area for heat to escape through. Every square meter of wall you eliminate is a square meter that isn't bleeding warmth into the killing cold outside. And when wind hits a circular structure, it has no corners to catch, no flat faces to push against. The pressure distributes evenly across the entire dome, and the wind slides around it. The frame that holds this circle is made from willow wood lattice, expandable diamond pattern sections, called kana, that fold flat for transport and open into walls when erected. Roof poles radiate from a central crown ring down to the lattice walls like spokes on a wheel. No nails, no bolts, only leather bindings and friction joints holding everything together. The entire frame weighs less than 250 kilograms and goes up in under 3 hours. Over that frame goes the felt, and this is where the engineering gets quiet and brilliant. Felt is not fabric. It is wool fiber that has been moistened, heated, and compressed until the individual fibers lock together into a dense mat. And inside that mat are millions of microscopic air pockets. Trapped air insulates well because air itself conducts heat poorly, and trapping it prevents convective movement that would carry warmth away. In summer, a gur uses 2 or 3 layers of felt. By autumn, 5. In deep winter, 8 or 9, until the walls are 10 to 15 centimeters thick, an insulating barrier that performs comparably to modern fiberglass batting. But unlike fiberglass, felt breathes. Moisture vapor from breathing, cooking, and bodies can work its way slowly outward through the wool fibers, which prevents condensation from building up inside the insulation and freezing into ice that would destroy its effectiveness. The air itself doesn't move through the walls. Only individual water molecules do, slowly enough that no heat is carried with them. And the wool contains lanolin, a natural grease that makes it hydrophobic. Snow landing on the gear's surface slides off rather than soaking in. Modern Gore-Tex took 800 years to approximate what sheep figured out first. The third component is the fire, and its placement is everything. The stove sits at the exact center of the ger, not against a wall, not in a corner, but dead center. And this single decision changes the thermal performance of the entire space. Heat radiates outward in all directions equally. The curved walls catch it and bounce it back inward rather than absorbing it and losing it to the outside. There are no distant corners where cold air can pool, no dead zones the warmth cannot reach, and the central position creates natural convection without any mechanical assistance. Hot air rises from the stove toward the roof opening, which drops the pressure near the floor. Cooler air, still warmer than outside, but cooler than the air near the ceiling, flows along the floor toward the stove, gets heated, rises again. A continuous circulation that moves warmth through every part of the interior all night long. The fuel is argol, dried dung from sheep, horses, and yaks. It sounds primitive until you consider what it actually does. Argol burns slowly and steadily, producing consistent heat over hours, rather than the quick intense flash of wood. It produces less smoke than wood in an enclosed space. And it was everywhere, collected through the warmer months and stockpiled for winter. Before sleep, the family banked the fire, cut the airflow so coals smoldered rather than burned, and the felt held enough warmth that interior temperatures stayed survivable through the coldest hours before dawn. The fourth component is the vent, the tuno, the crown ring at the peak of the roof where all the roof poles meet. Structurally, it is the keystone of the entire frame. Thermally, it is the system's pressure valve. A square felt flap called the urker covers it, controlled by ropes from inside. Open it wide, and you get maximum ventilation. Smoke out, moisture out, fresh air in. Close it down, and you preserve heat. The family read the interior continuously and adjusted in real time. Too much smoke meant opening the vent wider. Temperature dropping too fast meant closing it further. Condensation forming on the felt walls meant airflow had become insufficient and moisture was accumulating. The vent was never set and forgotten. It was managed the way you manage a living thing, constantly, attentively, in response to what the shelter was telling you. The fifth component is the door, and it is the most deliberately engineered weak point in any structure you will ever encounter. The opening stands only 1.3 to 1.5 meters tall. A small opening loses less heat when used, and the cold air that does enter comes in low, where the convection current from the stove immediately pulls it inward and begins rewarming it before it can spread. The door always faces south, away from the prevailing northern winter winds, directly toward the low winter sun that strikes the entrance during the brief daylight hours. In a blizzard or extreme cold, A second felt layer hangs inside the doorframe, creating an airlock effect that traps a buffer of air between the two barriers. The door wasn't just an entrance, it was the system's weakest point, and they knew exactly how to defend it. Every component strengthened every other component. The circle cut heat loss, the felt trapped warmth, the centered fire spread heat evenly and drove natural circulation. The vent gave control without waste. The door minimized exposure, while the convection system neutralized what cold did enter. But even a perfect machine fails if you place it in the wrong location. And this is where most people don't realize how deep the knowledge went. The jar by itself wasn't enough. You could build the most thermally perfect structure in human history, and still freeze to death if you set it down in the wrong place. The Mongols understood this with the same clarity they understood felt and fire. Placement wasn't an afterthought. It was half the solution. Mongol families didn't wander the steppe randomly when winter came. They moved to specific winter campsites, locations chosen not by instinct or habit, but by accumulated knowledge so precise it took generations to build. A family might return to the same hillside for 40 years. Their grandparents had returned to it before them. These sites were selected, remembered, and passed down because they worked. And they worked because someone had spent enough winters watching the same landscape to understand exactly what it did to wind, to cold air, to sunlight, and to snow. They didn't have weather satellites. They had something better. 40 generations of watching the same hills. The primary target was wind shadow. On open steppe at -40, wind is the difference between surviving and not surviving. But the steppe is not perfectly flat. There are shallow valleys, gentle hillsides, rock formations, ridges, and each of these creates a pocket where moving air slows down. A camp placed on the sheltered side of a hill, in a slight depression, or behind a natural rock formation, could reduce wind exposure from 80 kilometers per hour to 30. That difference is not a matter of comfort. It is a matter of whether the felt can do its job at all. South-facing slopes added another layer of advantage. The winter sun sits low on the horizon, and a south-facing slope catches more of it during the brief daylight hours. That rocky ground absorbs solar radiation through the day and releases it slowly through the night, warming the ground beneath the ger by a few degrees. In extreme cold, a few degrees is everything. But not every low point was safe. Cold air is dense, and it sinks. In deep, narrow valleys, with no drainage outlet, the coldest air in the entire landscape would pool at the bottom overnight, dropping temperatures lower than the open steppe above. Mongol families knew to avoid those spots, to choose shallow valleys or positions partway up a slope, where cold air could drain downhill, rather than collect around them while they slept. Snow made the invisible visible. Bare patches on the ground told you wind was hitting hard there, scouring the surface clean. Deep drifts in unexpected places told you wind was dropping its load in a sheltered zone, and that zone was worth investigating. Certain grasses and shrubs only established themselves in spots where wind was consistently weaker, where the microclimate was slightly less brutal. Those plants were markers. A family that knew how to read them could identify a protected campsite without spending a single winter night there first. This knowledge could not be written down. There were no instruments to capture it, no maps precise enough to hold it. It lived in spatial memory, in the felt sense of a landscape that a father passed to a son by walking the same ground together in winter, pointing at a ridge and saying, "This is where the northwest wind breaks. That low spot fills with cold air before dawn. This southern slope is the first to warm when sun comes through." And because the gore could be dismantled and moved in 3 hours, the family could respond when conditions shifted. If the wind changed direction midwinter, they moved the structure 30 or 40 meters to regain the shadow. No walls to demolish, no foundation to abandon. Just 3 camels and a family that knew exactly where to go next. Remove any single element, the circle, the felt, the fire placement, the terrain, and the whole system fails. That's not coincidence, that's design. Nearly half of Mongolia's population still lives in jars today. Not in museums, not in cultural preservation zones. In actual gers, in actual winters, in the same killing cold that has defined this landscape for centuries. And the reason is not tradition. Tradition is what you hold on to when something better hasn't come along yet. The ger has survived because nothing better has come along. people tried. After Mongolia's modernization push in the 20th century, alternative housing designs were introduced. Fixed structures, apartment blocks, imported architectural models. Some families moved in, many moved back out. The gyr outperformed them in the conditions that mattered most: extreme cold, fuel efficiency, adaptability, and the ability to relocate when the land or the season demanded it. No modern design built for that environment has matched all four simultaneously. Engineers still study it, not as a historical curiosity, but as a working model. The ventilation dynamics of the tonneau, the weight distribution of the lattice frame under wind load, the way heat moves through 9 layers of compressed felt, these are active areas of research in thermal engineering and sustainable design. When NASA began studying dome habitat structures for long-duration missions to Mars, where temperatures can drop to -125 degrees Celsius, and the environment offers almost no buildable resources, the research trail led back, among other references, to the Mongolian gyr. A structure built from felt and willow wood on the Eurasian steppe was informing the design of shelters for another planet. We call ancient things primitive because they look simple. But simplicity that survives 1,000 winters isn't primitive. It's the result of 1,000 winters removing everything that didn't work until only the perfect solution remained. And so we come back to where we started. To that night on the open steppe, to -50 degrees Celsius, to wind tearing across frozen grassland at 60 kilometers per hour. Outside, nothing survives without shelter. The cold is not a metaphor. It is a physical force that kills without hesitation and without exception. But inside a circle of felt and wood, a family has banked the fire for the night. The coals are smoldering. The tonneau is adjusted just enough to let the last of the smoke out, without bleeding the warmth away. The felt walls hold the heat. The curved shape holds the structure. The land outside does the rest. Outside, the wind is still coming. It always is. But inside, a child is sleeping. The gyr was never designed for comfort. It was designed for survival. And the difference between those two things is 1,000 years of cold mornings, dead fires, and the people who studied both long enough to make sure it never happened again.